بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم أما بعد فقد قال جل وعلا في كتاب المجيد بعد أن نعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد صدق الله العظيم وقال نبينا صلى الله عليه وسلم في معنى الحديث من سلك طريقا يلتمس فيه علما سهل الله له الطريق إلى الجنة أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. Alhamdulillah, it is a great honor for me to be in this wonderful community. And when I say wonderful community, I really do mean it. I'm not just buttering you up. I honestly mean this is a wonderful community. Why do I say that? Because many communities that I've visited, let's just say that it's a very plain feeling, meaning there's not much diversity there, right? But as soon as I came to this masjid, I got an immediate feeling of the love between the community members, and I felt that I was truly experiencing the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in all its different shades and everything that the ummah has to offer. Alhamdulillah, I found it, mashallah. Right? So it is a great honor to be here. So as Brother Jamal he mentioned that I'm coming from part of Dar Qasim. I wanted to speak shortly about Dar Qasim, just very shortly, and the vision and model of Dar Qasim. Right? The motto, right? You can learn a lot about an institution from the motto. Okay? So the motto of Dar Qasim is in the quest for more knowledge. Okay? In the quest for more knowledge. That says a lot. Okay? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He commands the Prophet ﷺ in Surah Taha to make a dua. Does anyone know what dua he's commanded to make in Surah Taha? Oh, mashallah, the sisters got a point on the brothers. We should start keeping score now. Right? Okay, so this is the dua that he was commanded to make was waqur. Right? So qur means say, Rabbi zidni ilma. Right? Oh my Lord, increase me in knowledge. Okay? So there you have the motto, right? In the quest for more knowledge. Okay? So some of us may have come and when you saw the screen, who is Allah? It's like, I know that. Right? But can we ever know the extent of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is? Okay. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, Allahumma la nuhsi thana'an alayk. Oh Allah, we can never encompass your praise. Right? So even the Prophet ﷺ, who knew Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the most, right, he did not encompass all of the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? So there's always increase that we can have. Okay? So when we say in the quest for more knowledge, what does that mean? That means a person's journey in knowledge is perpetual. Okay? So in the Al-Qasim, even the teachers, they are required to continue studying. Right? You can't be a teacher if you stop studying. Right? You have to continue studying. So the one thing that we want to remove from the ummah is that, I studied my basics of Islam when I was in grade school, after school, Sunday school. All of that is necessary and needed, but at no point does the study of the deen end in the quest for more knowledge. Okay? So now we know that, we have to continue to study, but then how should that studying be? Okay? One is that a person takes just random classes. Right? Took a class here, took a class there. Okay? That's not a path. Okay? Brother Jamal mentioned it, and I also mentioned in the beginning when I mentioned the hadith, whosoever treads a path in which you seek knowledge. Now, what's a path? Right? Ask yourself, what's a path? Okay? If I'm just walking in circles and I'm just doing a zigzag and I end up back at the same point, is that a path?
No.
That's not a path. How do you define a path?
That leads to a certain destination.
Good, it leads to a certain destination, right? Okay. What else are you gonna have on a path, right? If you, let's say you go on a road trip, what are you gonna have? When you sit in the car, what do you put on? Direction, right? You got the GPS. You know, sometimes it baffles my mind that people didn't have GPS at a point. Can you imagine that? Just like, you know, it's like, man, you guys are smart. You just have a map and you just follow it. I can't do that. I need my GPS, right? So if you're gonna be studying, what do you need? You need a GPS, okay? What does that mean? That means the GPS is gonna tell you, okay, take this exit, take that exit. This is your checkpoint. This is your stop here, okay? So if you're just studying with no vision in mind, it's good. It's better than not studying, okay? But is that the prophetic model? No, it's not the prophetic model, okay? So just like we're organized about our education when it comes to getting a career, right? Person wants to take on any career, right? There's a set path of education that you take, okay? So we have to be organized and serious about our Islamic learning as well, okay? And that's why what, mashallah, Masjid Ar-Rahman is doing is great, because you've now structured it and it's organized. Hey, this month we're gonna do this topic, and that month we're gonna do that topic. Or we're gonna have a series of scholars, they're gonna come and they're gonna speak to us, okay? So that's a little bit about the model of Dar Qasim, and that's what we want to focus on. We focus on adult education, right? Every time I go anywhere and I speak to people about education, about Islamic education, it's like, hey, you guys take kids? I'm like, no, brother. I don't want your child. I want you. Come. Tafaddal. Right? We have, mashallah, we have people that are working to teach the children. We heard a wonderful Jum'ah khutbah today about the rights of children upon their parents. Okay? But there's a right that you owe to yourself. And that right is that you study the deen. Okay? Now, with that being said, this tonight and tomorrow, inshallah, we're going to be studying Aqeedah. Okay? Can anyone tell me what does Aqeedah mean?
Creed, core belief.
Okay, creed, core belief. Okay?
Faith.
Faith. Okay? Approach. Okay? Right. So, this is a science that we study in the deen, and it has many names. Okay? For example, one of the names of it is ilm al-tawheed. Okay? The science of tawheed, right? Knowing the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? There's another name of it is ilmu asma'illahi wa sifatih. The knowledge of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His attributes. Okay? So this science has many names. Okay? There are a few main things that we study in this science. Okay? One is, who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Okay? What do we know about His being? What do we know about His attributes? Okay? And then we also study about prophethood. Okay? What makes someone a genuine prophet? What distinguishes an imposter from a true prophet? Okay? And then we have what we would call the ghaib, right? So you have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we study about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we study about nubuwah, right? Prophethood. And then we study about what we would call sam'iyat or ghaib, meaning those things that we can only know through the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, okay? Through wahy, okay? Because as Muslims, we believe that we are able to comprehend some things through our senses, right? I can see you guys in front of me, right? If someone speaks to me, I can hear them. So my senses are an avenue of my comprehension and my faculty of knowledge. Okay. Sometimes I may not be able to see something or hear something, but I may be able to use the clues around myself to deduce an answer. Right? So that's my intellect. But now my intellect is going to come at a certain point, is going to stop. Okay? Can my intellect tell me what Jannah is going to be like? Like, based on your intellect, describe Jannah to me. I don't know. Right? Based on your intellect, tell me what are the angels in the grave going to ask you? I don't know. You can't tell me that. Right? The only way that I can have that knowledge is through revelation, which would come to a prophet. Right? So these are the three main categories of Aqeedah. The first one is the study of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His attributes. Okay? And the second is the study of prophethood. Okay? And the third is the study of the unseen. Okay? It's three nice bullet points. You don't know, I might ask you towards the end of the lecture, like, hey, what were those bullet points? I do stuff like that sometimes. Okay. So the agenda for today, usually I don't start with this lesson. Okay? Usually when I start in a classroom setting, we start with what we're going to start tomorrow. Okay? And what we're going to start with tomorrow is going to be, how do you know something? So it's like, wait, what does that have to do with Aqeedah? And well, why do I have to know that? How do I know something? Okay? But it's a very important question. Okay? Believe it or not, okay, it might sound like, okay, that's a very silly question. Okay? But you'll have people out there in mainstream that will actually say, none of this is real. Okay? It's like, what? What do you mean none of this is real? Okay? We call that armchair philosophy. You know what armchair philosophy is? It's when you have everything nice in life that you want, and then you have nothing better to do, so you just sit on your armchair and it's like, hey, let me think of something crazy. That's armchair philosophy. Okay? So when we engage with the broader community, we're going to have to address these type of questions. That, okay, well, how do I know that I actually exist? Right? Someone says, well, how do you know God exists? Well, we usually get caught up in that second part, right? The God exists part. But what's the first part of the question? How do you? How do you know? Right? It's like, oh, hold on, let's stop there for a second. Like, how do I know anything? Right? What's a valid source of knowing something? Okay? And that's going to become a very major discussion. Okay? Because something that I've noticed, especially with people that study in the Western educational system, they their brains are kind of split into half. Right? When it comes to their deen and when it comes to things that they believe about the religion, they're like, okay, this is on one side of my mind. And then everything that they study in school goes on another side. Okay? And if you ask them, it's like, wait, why do you have this dichotomy? Right? Why do you separate, why do you make this distinction? They won't be able to tell you why. Okay? Because for them, faith is just blind belief. Okay? You say, well, that's just what I believe. Right? I believe this. But what they're taught in the school system, it's taught to them from a completely different philosophy. Right? The science that's taught to them and everything that's taught to them is taught from a materialistic philosophy that has a certain stance on what constitutes knowledge and what doesn't constitute knowledge. Okay? And tomorrow we're inshallah going to delve into that. Okay? But that's a little bit, it's academic sometimes. Right? And sometimes, I'm not trying to scare anyone away, I really hope everyone comes because it's very important. Okay? But it can get a little dry and you kind of have to put on your thinking cap. Okay? But today, since it's the blessed day of Friday, I wanted to start with just talking about who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? And this is something that I actually picked up from one of my teachers, right? Dr. Muhammad Volkan. He was giving a similar workshop in our masjid, and he said, look, before I speak to you guys about kufr, I want to speak to you about iman. It's a very beautiful statement. Like, look, tomorrow we're going to talk about what the materialists say and what the naturalists say and why that's wrong and what happened in the West and why this occurred and so on and so forth. We're going to hear about a whole lot of disbelief. Let's go ahead and start off on the right foot and start up speaking about Iman first. Right? Let's get a little bit of that nur and that light of Iman first. And then inshallah tomorrow we'll kick off from where we need to kick off, inshallah. Okay? Now. So when we come to speaking about who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we come to recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through His attributes. Okay? Now we can look at the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from many different perspectives. Okay? Today we're going to look at the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from 4 different perspectives. Okay? One way of looking, one of those perspectives, is what we would call in Arabic, we would call as-sifat as-salbiyya. Okay? As-sifat as-salbiyya, in Arabic the word salb means to remove something. Okay? So when we say as-sifat as-salbiyya, what we mean is what are things that we negate from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? It's a very important question. Why? Because when someone asks you, who do you believe in? Okay? And you say, well, I believe that there's a God. When you speak to a Christian and you say, oh, hey, I believe in a God, then their definition of God is very different than what you and I have as a definition of God. Okay? Growing up over here, many of you guys, I don't know actually, I don't know what the kids watch today, right? But back in my day, shouldn't have been watching this as kids, but we had The Simpsons. Anyone familiar with The Simpsons? Right? Okay? Right? Anytime they had, and this is obviously is blasphemous, right? But when they would show God, what would it be? There would be a man with a beard and a long flowing white robe sitting on a cloud in the skies. Right? So in the Judeo-Christian context, when you say God, you get a picture of a human being. Right? So when you have an atheist who says, well, I don't believe in God. And so I do believe in God. It's like, well, hey, let's first define what we're speaking about when we say God. Okay? Who is God? Okay? So one way that we define and we describe someone is saying this is not what God is. Right? This is not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. These are things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pure from. Okay? So that's what we do in the sifat as-salbiyya. They are things that we say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pure from these things. Okay? So the first attribute that we say of purity is what we're all familiar with, which is at-tawheed. What does tawheed mean?
Oneness.
Oneness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one. So what are we saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pure from? Okay, good. So we're saying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pure from partners. Okay? And then we'll go into different types of tawheed. Okay? So this Arabic text that I have here, I'm using a very famous text of Aqeedah that is written by Imam Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi rahimahullah in his famous work Al-Aqeedah al-Tahawiyya, which is also named as Al-Musamma bi-Aqeedati Ahli Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Right? It is the definitive manual of what Sunni creed is. Right? This is what we as Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah believe in. Right? Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah is a term that everyone should be aware of. Okay? It means the people who follow the Prophet ﷺ, that's the Sunnah part. Anyone know what the Al-Jama'ah means? Okay, which group?
Jamaat al-Sahaba.
Excellent, mashallah. Okay, the Jama'ah, the group of the companions. Okay, that is extremely important. Why? Look, if you find any deviant group, are they going to say we don't follow the Prophet? Think about it. Right? Every deviant group that you've had in Islamic history, right? We've had deviant sects. Did any of them say we don't follow the Quran? No. Everyone lays claim to the Quran. It's a very important point. Please listen carefully. Every deviant sect that has come has said, hey, we also follow the Quran. We also follow the Sunnah. So what distinguishes us from them? It's how we understand those primary sources. Okay? That's the importance of scholarship. Okay? Scholarship says that I have a chain that goes all the way back to the Prophet ﷺ, which corroborates my understanding of what the Quran and Hadith are saying. Okay? So when we believe in what the Prophet ﷺ said, what we're saying is we believe according to what the Sahaba radiallahu anhum believed. Okay? Look, for example, you take the first deviant sect that arose in Islamic history, which was Al-Khawarij. Okay? Al-Khawarij, they had a belief that anyone that commits a major sin is not a believer. Okay? Where do you think that they brought the proof for that from? They just made it up? No? They said, I will bring an ayah to prove this. Okay? Like, hey, I have an ayah from the Quran that says this, look. Okay? So now when we have people saying, hey look, I'm going to open the Quran and I'm going to tell you what the Quran says. He's like, hold on, stop right there. Do you have a chain of transmission that you studied the Quran from someone who studied the Quran, from someone who studied the Quran all the way back to the Prophet ﷺ? Okay? This is the beauty of our tradition. Right? Imam Ibn Khaldun rahimahullah, I believe he says that the Muslim Ummah has three things that no other civilization has. One of them is the system of isnad. Isnad is what we call sanad. Right? It's your chain of narrations. Right? So I can tell you who I studied under, and I can tell you who they studied under, and I can go all the way back to the Prophet ﷺ. Say, look, if I'm explaining this hadith to you, you can be comfortable that this is how the Sahaba radiallahu anhum understood it. Okay? So when we say we are Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, what we mean, yes, ma'am.
Oh, you can finish. I was going to ask you.
Go ahead. Come on.
So doesn't that mean it's kind of like a closed circle? You can only learn things from inside?
As opposed to?
Like, you'd have to verify. Like, if you were reading a book, for example, you'd have to verify that, oh, this is, like, is there like a name for the group or something?
For Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that is the name of the group. Right? So for example, on the other side you have the Shia. Right? And you have, okay? So when we say Sunni, right? Where does the word Sunni come from? It comes from Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Right? It's a shorter form of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Okay? Right? So when we study Aqeedah, we have to study it through the medium of how the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they understood their belief and creed from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay? So when Imam al-Tahawi rahimahullah, he wrote this very famous work, right? Al-Aqeedah al-Tahawiyah, okay? Or Aqeedah Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the Aqeedah of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. This is now when he documented it. Okay? What do we mean by he documented it? Before you have the oral tradition. Okay? The oral tradition is it's understood and is taught from teacher to student to student to teacher, right? So on and so forth. But it's not documented in written form. Okay? As times change, Imam Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi rahimahullah, he's coming around 300 Hijri. Okay? He notices that now there's a need to document the Aqeedah of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Okay? So now he documents it. Okay? All of that we came from over here. I just wanted to explain to you, where am I getting this from? We take a really important point from this. Anytime someone teaches you something, or you're learning something, say, hey, where are you getting that from? Right? We always fact check. Right? So this is the line from Al-Aqeedah al-Tahawiyah. Inna Allah ta'ala wahidun la sharika lahu. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one without partner. Okay? we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the name Al-Ahad. Okay? So one thing that I want to do today, inshallah, time permitting, I want us to remember these names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's how we connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? When we say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the name Al-Ahad, Al-Ahad is that you negate partners. Okay? So that is the difference between Al-Ahad and which will come Wahid. Okay? Sometimes we translate Al-Ahad as the one, and then we say, okay, Al-Wahid is also the one. Okay? But there's a difference in the two. Okay? When we're saying Al-Ahad, what we're saying is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no partners. Right? We have this ayah from Surah Furqan, right? وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ شَرِيكٌ فِي الْمُلْكِ. There is no partner for him in his dominion. Okay. So, when we're talking about these attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, okay, one is that we have what we call the audible proof. Okay, when we say audible proof, we say naqli or sam'i. Sam'i means from hearing. Okay, so remember we said that there's a part of Aqeedah that we can only know through wahy. Right? We can't know what's going to happen in the grave by using our intellect. You need the Prophet ﷺ to tell you that. Okay, so any point that we have in our Aqeedah, it has to have a proof, what we call in the naql, right? In the nusus, right? When we say nusus, we mean by that the Quran and Sunnah. Okay? So any point that I'm going to make over here, that this is what we believe about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm also going to give a, what type of proof? A naqli proof. Right? Naqli means it's in the text. Okay? Now there are some things that we can also prove rationally. Okay? And sometimes even those rational proofs we can take from the text. Okay? So on one hand you have naqli, right, which means textual proof. And then on the other hand we have what we call aqli. Right? Aqli comes from the word aql, which means your intellect. Right? So you can use your rationale to do this. Okay? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Anbiya, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, it says, لو كان فيهما آلهة إلا الله لفسدتا. Were there more than one God in the heavens and the earth, then they would have ceased to exist. Meaning it would have just gone to, chaos. Okay. So now the scholars of Aqeedah, they extract from this a rational proof. Okay. And this will now show you the depth of Islamic scholarship. Okay. Now when you and I might read it, you're like, this doesn't seem like a logic. Is this a logical proof? It's like, well, yes, it is a logical proof. Okay? So here's the scenario. Okay? Imagine that there are two gods that have the same exact power. Okay? Imagine, right? Hypothetically. And we're going to show that it's impossible. Okay? Let's say that they both have the same exact power. Okay? And one of them wants it to rain and the other doesn't want it to rain. Okay? What scenarios do you have? Can it rain and not rain at the same time? Let's say one area at the same time. Can it rain and not rain at the same time? It can't. Right? It's like right here. Right? I know it's like, you can have it rain in half of Coatesville and not in the other half. It seems like, just the whole thing. Right? You can't have that happen. Very simple. You can't have two opposites together. Right? So that first scenario of both of them want happening, we can clearly cross that off and say that's impossible. Okay? Second scenario is none of those happen. Right? So what he wants doesn't happen, what the other one wants doesn't happen either. So okay, well that's great because then neither of them are God. Right? So that also doesn't prove that there can be more than one. And the other one would be that one overpowers the other. Right? So that would mean that one is God and the other one isn't. Right? So now what do you have? You're left with one Allah. Right? So this is what he's saying. لو كان فيهما آلهة, if there were more than one God, لفسدتا. It wouldn't work. It's impossible. Okay? Now, Okay, now there is a possible objection. What if they both want the same thing? Okay, fine. Right? Look, we don't need it to actualize, we just need the possibility. Is there a possibility that they're going to want opposite things? There is. If you say that they can't want the different things, then you're saying that they don't have choice. And if they don't have choice, they're not God. God has choice. Okay? Now, so this is also a proof of Tawheed that can count as a rational proof from the Quran itself. Okay? So we did the naqli proof, we did the textual proof, which was from Surah Furqan, he has no partners. Then we did this one that also counts as a rational proof. Okay? Then we have types of Tawheed. Okay? So when we say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one, okay, alhamdulillah, everyone said, okay, Allah does not have a partner. Okay? But Tawheed goes beyond that. Okay? There are many different types and levels of Tawheed. The first one is what we said, Tawheed of the being. Right? The being of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not accept any divisions. Okay? Who got it wrong here? Yes. Okay? That's point 2 for the sisters, brothers. You guys gotta wake up, mashallah. Right? The sister said, okay, the Christians got it wrong here. What did the Christians say? The Trinity. Right? They're like, oh, it's one, but it has 3 parts. No, that's what Tawheed says. Tawheed says, no, there can't be any parts. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's being does not accept division. You can't separate and divide the being of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? It's clearly stated in the Quran, لَقَدْ كَفَرَ الَّذِينَ قَالُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ ثَالِثُ ثَلَاثَ. Okay? Surely those that said that Allah is one of 3 have disbelieved. Okay? So that's something that we make no compromise about. Okay? When it comes to our Aqeedah and when it comes to what we believe about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we make absolutely no compromise. Why am I saying that? Because unfortunately, today there is a trend of what we call perennialism. Right? It's a very dangerous trend which says that as long as you do good and as long as you believe in some type of God, right, and you have following some type of religion, they're all paths that lead to the same, and you all end up in heaven. See, no, that's not what the Prophet ﷺ told us, and that's not what the Quran says. The Quran says, لَقَدْ كَفَرَ الَّذِينَ قَالُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ ثَالِثُ ثَلَاثَ. It doesn't matter if that person is the nicest person that's helping everyone, but if they don't have the correct belief about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's not gonna, they're not gonna have salvation in the akhirah. Right? That's something that we cannot compromise on. Right? When I explain this, sometimes it might sound a little abrasive to people, right? But there is something called having a spine and standing up for what you believe in. Right? If a person is in general a very nice person, but they have foul thoughts about your mother, how do you feel about that person? Are you ready to compromise with that person? No way. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran says that those that say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taken a son, right? He says, تَكَادُ السَّمَاوَاتُ يَتَفَطَّرْنَ مِنْهُ وَتَنْشَقُّ الْأَرْضُ وَتَخِرُّ الْجِبَالُ هَدًّا أَنْ دَعَوْا لِلرَّحْمَنِ وَلَدًا. That it is about the skies, out of anger for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they want to split. And the earth wants to split. And the mountains, they want to be split asunder. Right? They want to become disintegrated because of this heinous crime that has been committed against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? That you will say that someone as pure as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done something like this. Right? So this is not something that we compromise on. Right? Now, okay. So that is the tawheed of the being of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then we go to tawheed al-sifat, right? The tawheed of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What that means is that all of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no one shares in the reality of those attributes. Okay. Does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala see? We can get a resounding yes, mashallah. Right? Yes. Okay. Does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hear?
Yes.
Does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala know?
Yes.
Does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speak?
Yes.
Okay. Right? Everyone said yes, correct? Okay. Do we see? We see, man. We see. Yeah. Oh, we see. Okay, mashallah.
Not see like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees.
Yeah. But we see, right? We have a faculty of vision that we can see, but right? Do we hear?
Yes, we do.
Right? We have knowledge. We know stuff. Right? Some stuff. You know, right? Okay. So then I thought we said Tawheed al-Sifat. Right? No one shares in the attributes of Allah. It's different. Good. Okay, exactly. When we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He sees, His sight, the reality of His sight is entirely different from ours. Okay? Brother, what's your name? Yes, Alpha. So what was that?
Alpha.
Alpha. Okay. How far can you see?
2020.
Oh, mashallah. Okay. Right. Superman can see past the walls. Right? He has laser vision. Okay? Right. But for everyone, there's a certain point, like how far you can see. Right? You can hear, you have exceptional hearing. Right? Say, okay, I can hear what the person in the next room is saying. Right? But 2 rooms down, can you hear? No. Right? Someone has exceptional smell. They walk into the room and they can tell you what's being cooked. Right? I know these like, macadamia nut cookies that are being baked or something. Right? Okay. Right? But all of our faculties, they end at a certain point. Okay? And all of our faculties, they are dependent. Okay? For you and I to see, what do we need?
Eyes.
We need eyes. What else do we need? And if I turn off the lights, you see anything? Now we need light. Okay? Right? The light has to reflect off the object, right? Okay, yes. Oh, yeah, we gotta be alive, we gotta feed ourselves so we can see, right? Eat some carrots, that's what my mama used to say. Right? Eat some carrots if you want your vision to be good. I don't know if that's true, factual. Okay? Right? So our eyesight is dependent on our eyes, on light, on other things. Okay? Our hearing is dependent on our ears, sound waves, all of that. Right? For us to speak, what do we need? We need our tongue, we need our vocal box, we need our voice box, we need all these different things that we need. Does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala need any of this to see? Does He need any of these physical attributes to see? No. Okay. Does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sight have a certain point where it stops? No. Does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge, is it restricted in any sense? No. Okay? So when we say that Allah's attributes, He alone has those attributes, even though we may have those attributes that we share in names, the reality of those attributes are entirely different. Okay? So if you understand this principle, then a lot of things in Aqeedah will become very simple for you. Okay? That when we say that this is an attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, okay? Just because human beings may have something that has the same name as that attribute, doesn't mean that the reality of those attributes is the same. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond our comprehension. The closest that we can come to understanding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He uses the best possible human expression for us to come close to understanding who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. Okay? But the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is utterly different from the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? Now. Okay. Then we have Tawheedul Af'al. Okay? This is the Tawheed of actions. Okay? What does this mean? Okay? What this means, this is our famous dhikr that we make actually. We say La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. What does that mean? There's no might or power except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what does that have to do with this? See, what happens is that we learn translations, and then translations, they take you so far. Okay? But you need the context. Okay? You say, لا حول عن معصية ولا قوة على طاعة إلا بالله. There is no power that can turn you away from disobedience, nor is there any power that can give you the guidance to do a good action except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? Let that sit for a minute. Let that sit for a minute. Because what that means is every time you do a good action, who actually creates that action? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? What we're saying is something that is deeply impactful. Okay? Any action that you do, I move my hand. Okay? What I'm saying is I utterly do not have the power to bring this movement into existence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates this action. This is in Aqeedah of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Right? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala khaliqu af'alina. Allah is the creator of our actions. Because when we say Allahu khaliqu kulli shay, Allah is the creator of everything, our actions are part of a thing. Right? When you and I, we think about thing, we think like, okay, like an object, right? But that's the thing with definitions. You're using the Arabic word shay and you're giving it the English translation of thing. But that's not actually what it actually means in Arabic. In Arabic, shay is mawjood, is anything that is in existence. Okay? So if I'm not waving my hand right now, is that movement in existence? It's not in existence. Now I'm moving my hand. Did that movement come into existence? So is this a creation? It is a creation. So who creates this? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for a moment, just stop and think about that. Okay? That every action that occurs on the face of this earth and anywhere that is in existence, every action is at that moment created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You and I are powerless. That's why we say La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Okay? Now imagine that a person gets this actual aqeedah in the bottom of their heart. Do you think they're going to fear anyone? I was like, why should I fear anyone? All of it is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? This is that famous narration that happened with Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu. Yes, go ahead.
Does that mean like there's always been questions in philosophy about free will and such? Does that mean like what does that mean then?
Very good. Right? So my approach is I'm not going to bring the question. If someone asks the question, I'll answer the question. Okay? Obviously there's that question there, right? If you say, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates everything, do I have free will? Right? Number one, free will is a Western philosophical term. Right? So we don't want to use that one. Okay? We want to understand our aqeedah from our own intellectual tradition. Okay? So in our intellectual tradition, the Quran says, جَزَاءً بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ, as a result of what they used to acquire. Okay? So the Quran tells us two things. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates actions, and He also tells us that we acquire actions. Okay? So the first thing is, as a point of belief, we have to believe that Allah creates the action. We also have to believe that we have choice and we acquire our actions. Now how do you reconcile the two? Okay? Before we reconcile the two, the first thing that we have to know is, as for my aqeedah to be sound, whether I in my mind can comprehend the reconciliation or not, I need to believe in both points. Okay? That's a very important point. I need to believe in both points even if the reconciliation does not make sense to me. Okay? I believe that Allah creates my action. I also believe that I have some choice when it comes to it because I'm the one acquiring that action. What is the nature of that reconciliation? Scholars, they've said, and Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah in his famous work, he states this very clearly, okay, that a person has choice. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates the action according to a person's choice. Okay? So when you choose an action, for example, I choose, okay, I want to move my hand. When that choice is in me, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates that action. Okay? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is creating the action, isn't forcing that upon me. In fact, it's that when I choose the action, what we're saying as human beings, we're incapable of bringing something into existence. Right? It's an expression of our powerlessness, and it is an expression of the power of Allah. Okay? That I am powerless. When I choose to do something, I will not be able to bring it into existence until Allah brings it into existence. Okay? So this is how we reconcile the two. That when I choose something, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates it. So I do have choice, but at the same time, it's Allah who creates the action. Okay?
Very good explanation. Thank you.
Okay? Right. Okay. So when we're talking about the attributes of transcendence, or we talked about as-sifat as-salbiyya, okay, this is called taqdees. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has two names, right? As-Subuh and Al-Quddus. Okay, so far we've done Al-Ahad, which means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no partners in His being, right? What was the other name that we've done so far? Al-Wahid. Brothers, sisters, right? They're getting up on you guys. Right? Okay, so Al-Wahid. What does Al-Wahid mean? So we said, okay, Al-Ahad and Al-Wahid, they both mean the one, but there's a difference between the two.
No partners.
That was Al-Ahad. So what's Al-Wahid? Ah, mashallah. Mashallah. We need to give something special to the sisters today, right? So Al-Wahid means that no one shares in the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is one in His attributes, He's alone in His attributes. Okay? Now we come to the names 3 and 4. Okay? As-Subuh and Al-Quddus. Okay? They both mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pure. Okay? What is the job of the angels? What do the angels do? They worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam alayhi salam, what did the angels say? He's going to cause bloodshed, right? And what did they say about themselves? What do we do?
We worship.
We worship you. We are enough to worship you. Why you create that?
Okay, very good. Does anyone remember the ayah? Okay. وَنَحْنُ نُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِكَ وَنُقَدِّسُ لَكَ. Nusabbih, right? You hear the similarity? Subuh, nusabbih. Right? We say we do tasbih after salah, right? Okay. So when we say tasbih is and nuqaddis from al-Quddus, it means that we're saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pure. Okay? So both of these names, as-Subuh, al-Quddus, it means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pure. So okay, He's pure from what? Okay? So, نُنَزِّهُ اللَّهَ سُبْحَانَهُ وَتَعَالَى عَنْ جَمِيعِ النَّقَائِصِ. We state Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's purity from all deficiencies. Right? Our power has a limit, our sight has a limit, everything that we have has a limit. Those are deficiencies. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pure from any deficiencies. Okay? وَنُنَزِّهُ عَنْ جَمِيعِ الْعُيُوبِ. And we state His purity from all defects. Okay? Human beings sometimes they might not be able to see, right? Or they may have a defect in them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pure from any defects. Okay? And we say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pure from anything that is unbefitting of Him. Okay? So when we say subhanallah, again, part of my pet peeves of when it comes to translations, for some reason every translation has subhanallah as glory be to Allah. And for the life of me, I still haven't understood why that's the translation. I don't understand why. Okay? Subhanallah means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pure. Okay? So part of our understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that we state that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pure from anything that is unbefitting of Him. Okay? Now, these two names, they are very beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they are very powerful names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet ﷺ in his ruku', he used to read Subbuhun Quddusun Rabbul Malaikati wal Ruh. That Allah is pure, sanctified. Right? Rabbul Malaika, He is the Lord of the angels and is the Lord of Jibreel, the archangel. Okay? So when you have the Prophet ﷺ using these two names in ruku', what does it tell you? It means that these two names are a very powerful way of connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? Now part of taqdees, right, which means to state the purity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is to believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not resemble any created being. Okay? As Imam al-Tahawi rahimahullah, he puts it very nicely, لا تبلغه الأوهام ولا تدركه الأفهام. Okay? No imagination can ever reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? Now I like to, وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى, I like to explain this to people, right? And whenever I teach this, I like to give an example. Okay? You ever looked at, in popular culture, right? You have something like a dragon, right? You have these mythical creatures. You have a phoenix, you have a dragon, you have an alien, you have some monster, right? All of it is what? Right? You take a dragon, it's like, okay, it's part snake, part something else, snap some feet on it. What do? It's your imagination. In your imagination, you're using things that you've already experienced and seen, right? You want to make any mythical imaginary creature, you can't ever perceive something that you've never seen before. You always use things that you've seen before and you put that together, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, لا تبلغه الأوهام, your imagination can never reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything that you can think that, okay, maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like this, or He's like that, He looks like this. No. لا تبلغه الأوهام. You will never reach that. Okay? ولا تدركه الأفهام. Right? And your intellect will never truly comprehend who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. Okay? That's something fascinating. It is mind-blowing. Okay? Because we will never truly comprehend who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. Okay? Because for you to truly comprehend, like for example, you can know what's a human because you're a human. Right? But you will never truly know what is, for example, a dog. Because what is the reality of a dog? You're not a dog, you won't know. Right? Those people that believe we came from apes, then perhaps they might know. Right? We don't know. Right? We didn't come from no ape. Right? We came from Adam alayhi salam. Okay? Right? So we will never know the true comprehension of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will always be beyond our comprehension. Okay? That's why we say Adamul idraki idraku. That when a person recognizes that I cannot fully comprehend Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is as far as you can go in recognizing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? So when we say subhanallah, I like to say that our aqeedah is in our dhikr. Right? Because the purpose of aqeedah is not an academic class. Right? The purpose of aqeedah is you to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you sit down after salah and you say subhanallah, it should really hit you that what am I saying? Right? I'm saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pure. Pure beyond anything that I can imagine. Pure beyond anything that I can comprehend. Pure beyond the incorrect beliefs that people associate with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? That I am from those, I am doing the same thing that the angels do. نُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِكَ وَنُقَدِّسُ لَكَ. Right? With tasbih comes the qurb of Allah, comes the closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? Now, and then he says, وَلَا تُشْبِهُهُ الْأَنَامِ, and created beings do not resemble Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? And this is taken, for example, we have our naqli proof, right? We said the textual proof. This is from Surah Al-Shura. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. Okay? There is nothing like him. Okay? But the beautiful part about this ayah is what? Immediately after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. He is the hearing and He's also the seeing. See? Because as my teacher, he would explain to me, like, look, imagine if you're dealing with a Bedouin in the desert, and like, hey, look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, He's not this, He's not that, your mind can never reach Him. The Bedouin's going to tell you, okay, you're saying that God doesn't exist because you just described nothing. You understand what I'm saying? Okay. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't end there. He says, وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. But Allah hears and He sees. Okay. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pure from what our minds can reach. But at the same time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has attributes. He sees and He hears. Right? And we're going to get to some of them. I just wanted to point that out in this ayah. That when we negate, right? When we negate Allah's resemblance to human beings, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala immediately after that establishes that He has attributes. Okay? Okay. One of the other attributes of transcendence is al-baqa. Okay? We have, which name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes from this attribute? Can anyone tell me? Good. Al-Baqi. Right? The one who remains. Okay? As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Ar-Rahman, كُلُّ مَنْ عَلَيْهَا فَانٍ. Everyone on this earth will perish. وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ ذُو الْجَلَالِ وَالْإِكْرَامِ. Right? The countenance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will remain. Right? Allah will remain. Okay? So, Al-Imam al-Tahawi rahimahullah, he says, قَدِيمٌ بِلَا ابْتِدَاءٍ. He is eternal without beginning. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never had a beginning. He's always existed. Right? So, these are things that we know and we recognize. But when you let it hit you and when you let it sit, right, it's like subhanallah. There's nothing left for you to say but subhanallah. Right? Everything else comes into existence. Right? When you come into existence, that means you require someone to bring you into existence. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never came into existence. He always existed. He's the one that brings everyone into existence. So He is the eternal. He's the one that doesn't need anyone to exist. And He is the reason and the cause that everyone and everything else exists. Now when we say subhanallah, it's like, okay, now I understand what I'm saying, subhanallah. Okay? Da'imun bilantiha. He's remaining without ending. La yafna wa la yabid. He does not perish, nor does He cease to exist. Okay. These are very powerful names. Okay? So, we did al-baqi. From this attribute of baqa, we also get Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's name al-awwal and al-akhir. And let's do a comprehension check. What was the first name we did? Al-ahad. Okay, we'll give 1 point to the brothers this time, mashallah. What was the second name? Al-wahid. What is the difference between the two?
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no partners, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is
His attributes. Okay, so Al-Ahad was no partners. Al-Wahid is that He doesn't share with anyone His attributes. Okay, what was the third name that we did? As-Subuh and Al-Quddus. Okay, what do they mean? Pure. Okay, very good. Then we just did what right now? Al-Baqi, the one who remains. Next. It's over here on the screen. It's almost like cheating. Al-Awwal, Al-Akhir. Right? The first and the last. Okay? Right. The Prophet ﷺ used to make this dua. Okay? What am I trying to show here? What I'm trying to show is that sometimes when we think about Aqeedah, it's like, I'm just reading a book. That's not what Aqeedah was for the Prophet ﷺ. Look at the du'as of the Prophet ﷺ. Our teacher used to tell us that if you want a window into the heart of the Prophet ﷺ, look at the dua of Rasulullah ﷺ. If you want to know what is the Prophet ﷺ thinking in the most intimate moments that he has with his Rabb, with his Lord, such as ruku or sajda, what are the names of Allah that he is using? Right? So look at this dua of the Prophet ﷺ. Allahumma anta al-awwal falaysa qablaka shay. Oh Allah, you are the first, there is nothing before you. Right? Wa anta al-akhir falaysa ba'daka shay. You are the last, there is nothing that will be after you. Right? He imagined the grandeur of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? On the day when He will fold up the heavens and the earth, and there will be no one to respond, and He will say, Liman al-mulku al-yawm? For whom is the kingdom today? And no one will respond, and then Allah alone Himself will respond. Lillahi al-wahid al-qahhar. Right? For Allah, the one who subjugates everyone. Right? When everyone and everything else ends, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will remain. Right? وأنت الآخر فليس بعدك شيء. Now, and then as we mentioned, كل من عليها فان ويبقى وجه ربك ذو الجلال والإكرام. Right? There's a reason that why we enjoy Surah Ar-Rahman so much. Right? It's just like such a exposition of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So as believers, like I've noticed that even when you don't know the meaning of Surah Ar-Rahman, but you just listen to it, it does something to your heart. It's like, man, this is beautiful. Like every time you hear, it's like it's a different experience every time. Okay. Then we get to the attribute of al-ghina. Right? Al-ghina means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not in need. Okay? So from here we get Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's name Al-Ghani. Okay? Al-Ghani is the one who is not in need of anyone. Okay? As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, in Surah Fatir, يا أيها الناس أنتم الفقراء إلى الله والله هو الغني الحميد. O mankind, you are the ones who are in need to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You are faqir. Okay? والله هو الغني الحميد. Allah is the one who is independent, free of need and praiseworthy. Okay? So now, when we look at this, we say Allah is hayyun la yamut. Allah is alive and does not die. Okay? What does that have to do with the ghina? It means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not need anyone to exist. Okay? Qayyumun la yanam. Self-sufficient, does not sleep. Look, when you and I sleep, why do we sleep? Good. We are in need. What are we in need of? We're in need of a rest. Okay? We need food. We need drink. Right? We get exhausted, we get tired. Okay? So we are not able to keep going. Right? We need to stop. Right? We need rest. We need to recover. All of these, where do we see this? In Al-Ayatul Kursi, right? Okay? Allahu la ilaha illa huwa al-hayyul qayyum. Right? Allah, at every point Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, He is alive. He doesn't need anyone to be alive. Every moment that you and I are alive, we are entirely dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at every moment of our existence to be alive. Right? Our teacher, he told us that if you want to focus on one thing in your sajda, is that when you're in sajda, just focus on the fact that every moment that I am in this sajda is because Allah is giving me life. If at any moment Allah takes away life from me, I cease to exist. But Allah is alive and He doesn't need anyone to be alive. Right? He is qayyum, He is self-sufficient. He doesn't need to rest. While all of the world rest, He's the one that takes care of the world. Right? It's your 24/7 protection. قُلْ مَنْ يَكْلَؤُكُمْ بِاللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ. Right? Who is the one that takes care of you in the day and the night? Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually mentions that. وَكُلُّ شَيْءٍ إِلَيْهِ فَقِيرٌ لَا يَحْتَاجُ إِلَى شَيْءٍ. Everything is in need of Him, He needs nothing. Okay, so from here we took Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's name Al-Ghani and also Al-Qayyum. Right? Al-Qayyum has like two meanings to it. It has double fold. It means that He Himself doesn't need anyone to be existent, and at the same time He is who causes everyone else to exist. He's the one who maintains the world, and He's the one that maintains everything else that is in existence. Okay? So that is the meaning of Al-Qayyum, it is similarly the meaning of As-Samad. We all know this from Surah Ikhlas, right? Allahus Samad. Okay? Samad means He does not need anyone, and at the same time, everyone needs Him. Okay? What time do we have to stop for Maghrib?
Yeah, we can go on that 10 minutes.
Okay, we have 5-10 minutes? Okay. Okay. I'm going to try to get through some of our slides, inshallah. Okay. When we look at Al-Ismul A'zam, okay, how many of us are familiar with this term, Al-Ismul A'zam, or Ismullah Al-A'zam? So, Ismullah Al-A'zam is what comes in hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said, it is that name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, إِذَا دُعِيَ بِهِ أَجَابَ. Okay? That if you call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with this name, your dua is guaranteed answer. You want to know that name or not?
Yes.
Yeah. Right? That's what Aqeedah is. Right? Aqeedah is knowing who Allah is. Okay? Right? So, the Prophet ﷺ told us that we can find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's greatest name in two places. What is the greatest ayah in the Quran? Ayatul Kursi. Right? Allahu la ilaha illa huwal hayyul qayyum. Right? Till the end we recite it after every salah. Right? And the person that recites it after every salah, if they pass away, where do they go? Jannah. Right? So your Ayatul Kursi is your Aqeedah, akhi. Right? That's why we study Aqeedah. Right? Okay, so he said you can find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's greatest name in Ayatul Kursi and in the beginning of Surah Al-Imran. Who can tell me Surah Al-Imran is which surah in the Quran? Third surah. How does the third surah in the Quran start? Alif Lam Mim, then Allahu la ilaha illahu al-hayy al-qayyum. Okay? Now look at these. Did we cover the name al-hayy? The alive, right? Al-Hayy, the alive. Okay? Just think about that for a second. Okay? I know I say that a lot, but we do need to think. Okay? Think about the attributes of Allah. Look, there's one point when you say, okay, Allah is not this, Allah is not that. Okay? When you say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is alive, what does that mean? That means that's someone that you can interact with. Okay? That's the value of that name. Because look, today you have like these, people will say like, yeah, it's just like everything in the universe happens because of the Force. The Force. What, are we talking about Star Wars here? Like, what's going on? Right? The Force. They're like, yeah, I believe in Mother Nature. What's Mother Nature? Hey, what is that? It's like, like you're trying to run away from saying Allah. And you're literally trying hard. It's like, I feel spiritual when I'm in nature. It's like, how you created nature? Right? You just stop trying to run away. But what happens to them is this force. Right? The force is not alive. It can't communicate with you. Right? It doesn't see you. It doesn't hear you. Right? You can't trust upon the force. It doesn't have any will. Right? There's no volition there. Right? But when you say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is alive, right? وَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى الْحَيِّ الَّذِي يَرَاكَ حِينَ تَقُومُ. And trust upon the alive, the live one, who sees you when you stand up in salah. What does your aqeedah do? Your aqeedah brings power to your salah. When you stand in salah with the aqeedah that Allah is al-hayy, Allah is alive. And because He's alive, He's watching me pray. وَتَقَلُّبَكَ فِي السَّاجِدِينَ. As I go from sajda to sajda, my Allah is watching me. He's alive. وَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى الْحَيِّ الَّذِي لَا يَمُوتُ. Trust upon Allah, the one who doesn't die. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is alive. Right? Okay. So now in Allahu la ilaha illa huwal hayyul qayyum, we see these two names that we study, right? Al-Hayy and Al-Qayyum. Okay? So when we know and understand these names, they help us cultivate tawakkul. Right? SubhanAllah, let's look at this ayah. You know, it's amazing how much you can accomplish in a short amount of time. SubhanAllah. Like, because I'm looking at this and I'm saying, look at how many of these we've covered now. وَتَوَكَّل, and trust. عَلَى الْحَيِّ. What does al-hayy mean? The one who is alive. الَّذِي لَا يَمُوت. Right? The one that doesn't die. وَسَبِّحْ. Sabbih reminds us of which name of Allah? Subuh, the one who is pure. Meaning this is a command. Say that Allah is pure. So let's all act upon the command of Allah. The Quran is telling us to do what? Sabbih. Let's all say Subhanallah. Okay? Bihamdihi. And say Alhamdulillah. Let's all say Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Okay? وَكَفَى بِهِ بِذُنُوبِ عِبَادِهِ خَبِيرًا. And He is enough to know the sins of His servants. Ya Allah. Ya Allah. He is the one that's alive. Right? He is the one that does not die. He's the one who's pure. Now imagine that against this being you disobey. Right? That when a person breaks the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which being, whose orders are you breaking? وَكَفَى بِهِ بِذُنُوبِ عِبَادِي خَبِيرًا. He knows. Right? This is what Aqeedah brings to the table. Right? Now when a person doesn't have the Aqeedah, then a sin is just a sin. Right? It's just something that's a do and don't. But when you realize that no, this is Al-Hayy alladhi la yamut. This is Subuhun Quddus. How can I break His order? Does He need me? He doesn't need me. Right? If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides that this person is for Jahannam, who's going to stop Allah? He is the pure. No one can say anything to Allah. Right? So now we see this beautiful, beautiful dua on the Prophet ﷺ. I love this dua so much. Right? Allahumma laka aslamtu. O Allah, to you I submit all of my affairs. Wa bika amantu. And in you I have believed. Okay? Wa alayka tawakkaltu. Upon you I've trusted. Wa ilayka anabtu. And to I turn. Wa bika khasamtu. And is with you that I dispute with my enemies and those that I argue with. It's for your sake. When I go to do da'wah, I do it for your sake. Any disagreement that I have is with you. I take your name and I do it for you. Right? Allahumma inni a'udhu bi'izzatik. Oh Allah, I seek protection in your honor and your might. La ilaha illa ant. There is none worthy of worship except you. Antudillani. I seek protection that you send me astray. Anta al-hayyu alladhi la yamut. You are the alive that does not die. Wal jinnu wal insu yamutun. And jinn and man, they die. What's the Prophet ﷺ saying? I'm going to trust on the one who's always going to be there for me. Okay? Man and jinn are not going to be there. A person trusts upon their father, a person trusts upon their son, a person trusts upon their friend. One day that person is there and the other day that person is not there. But Allah is Al-Hayyu alladhi la yamut. Right? Whenever you need Allah, He's always there. When all of the world is sleeping, He's still Al-Qayyum. He's still the one. وَلَا يَؤُودُهُ حِفْظُهُمَا. Allah is the one who protects the heavens and the earth, and He maintains them in their existence, and He never gets tired of maintaining and protecting them. Right? Trust on that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is this a good place to stop?
I think so.
Yeah, inshallah. So we'll stop here. Yes, there is a question in the back.
When we use these attributes to name, like as common names for people, when we use the names of attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and keep it as the names of the people, and when we are calling them, is it appropriate to call? Because there is both. Some say it is like when you have the definite article out, and it is only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Otherwise, you can say, or some say it becomes a minor form of shirk if you call somebody as Rahman instead of calling Ar-Rahman. So, what is your opinion on that?
It's a very good question. there are some names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, that are commonly used. They're also used for human beings as well. Okay? So for example, in Arabic you say, هذا رب المنزل. This is the landlord. Right? So you're using the word Rabb there. Okay? Then you have something like Mawla. Right? So you say Mawla Bani Taym. Right? He's the one who was the freed, he's the freed servant from this clan. Right? So Mawla is also a name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You say Huwa Mawlana. He's our Mawla. Okay? So there are some names that are used, like for example, we said, you know, yeah, Allah hears, right? But we can never be As-Sami'. Right? As-Sami' is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? So it's as you said, right? They are those names that can only be used for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like Ar-Rahman. Okay? And you may have someone that if they have just a name like Rahman or Rahim, right? Then this could mean like, okay, it's an exaggerated form of a merciful person. Right? But we cannot call them Ar-Rahman. We can't call them Ar-Rahim. Right? Then we have to say Abdul Rahman, Abdul Rahim.